Park Chan-wook's No Other Choice didn't receive any Oscar nominations this year, and people have been calling it a snub, but is it really? And that's what this review will get into. But I want to start by saying that I wasn't particularly eager to see this film at all. I personally fell out of love with East Asian genre cinema, particularly from the horror and thriller genres, as they seem to contain this over-eccentric, over-the-top performance style, and it had a real lack of authenticity to it, and I just couldn't engage with it anymore. And it is worth saying that I was fond of these films. I used to love watching films from Takeshi Miike. I was interested in Sion Sono for a period. The last Park Chan-wook film I saw was Decision to Leave, and I don't remember too much from it other than it was a crime story about a detective, and I think he was in love with the suspect or was romantically interested in her. I couldn't tell you much more than that. What I do remember from the film is that it had impressive visuals, but that's not such a great takeaway when the visuals are more admirable than the story you were presented with. But we all have our different priorities. So I didn't have high expectations going into No Other Choice, but I read up that it's based on a novel called The Axe, which is written by Donald E. Westlake, who wrote a novel that the 1967 Point Blank starring Lee Marvin was based on. So I thought this could be interesting. So the plot of No Other Choice is about this family man who has worked at a paper manufacturing company for a couple of decades, and he's dedicated to his job, but then gets laid off, and he tries to get hired elsewhere in the same field, but gets turned down. So he then decides that in order to return to the field that he loves, he must go after the competition, that being other candidates who stand in his way, and he kills them off one by one. So it sounds fun and interesting as we're following a character who's so dedicated to his job that he'll go to extreme lengths to reclaim it back. But in a few years' time, I'll probably forget about the majority of events in this film, just like Decision to Leave. Now, that's because it feels as though there's some missing pieces in this film, despite its interesting premise. For example, there's no hard evidence presented to us where we're convinced that this guy is as dedicated to his craft as it's set out to be. We're just merely told that he's dedicated to his job and it's his whole life. But we've seen no evidence for his love towards it other than he really wants his job back. It's not explained to us why he's so passionate about that particular field. And because we're not presented with that evidence, there's a lack of emotion that I think is necessary for us to feel for this film to be memorable. Interestingly, I watched a 2005 film called The Axe, which is based off of the original source material. That was directed by Costa Gavras, but that film didn't show that evidence either. Again, it felt like there was a missing piece. At least with No Other Choice, there's a build-up to this character becoming a murderer. He's hesitant at first. You're not absolutely sure that he has the capabilities of being a killer. Whereas in the original French film, this normal guy, within the snap of a finger, becomes a murderer. And it's such a stark change of direction for the character that it's almost not believable. But the film tries to cover up that problem by presenting this character as a killer from the very start and then working its way back through the timeline. But hey, it was still unconvincing. No Other Choice does contain these over-the-top performances, the shrieking, the shouting that I referenced earlier. The French version obviously doesn't have that issue, but you could say that the French film's lack of depth is even worse. No Other Choice isn't a memorable film like Oldboy and The Handmaiden. There's no disturbing moments attached other than one haunting image in regards to one of the candidates that he kills and how he disposes of the body. But if I were to praise this film, it's probably not even probably, it is the best visuals that I've seen in a Park Chan-wook film. I can't think of another director who presents visuals like this. It's truly impressive. But this is where you could argue that it's remarkable visuals. It's not just the cinematography, it's the editing as well. Technically, the film is remarkable. You could argue that the style of the film is being prioritized over its story. Going back to the lack of elements, the missing pieces, there's an engaging plot there, but there's a lack of character impact. And I do think that causes a blow to a film. It is possible that my distaste towards the film is heavily influenced by my tiredness towards the performance style that you see in East Asian genre cinema that I referenced just before. But the French film contains the same problems in regards to the missing elements. And I do wonder if the source material is the problem. However, a screenwriter is not obliged to remain 100% loyal to source material. But you could argue that the influence from mainstream audiences may say otherwise. There's frequent complaints when a film is based off a book that everyone loves. If it doesn't remain 100% loyal, people are up in arms. So Park Chan-wook has proved he is pulling off some visually impressive films, but Decision to Leave and No Other Choice, while these both display a highly competent technical craft, they do leave me with very little interest in what this filmmaker does next. You could argue that Oldboy and The Handmaiden left a mark due to the level of disturbance in them two films, where it's embedded within the stories and the visuals for that matter. But while Park Chan-wook is arguably simmering down that tone and moving into storytelling that is more safe with these two last works of his, he's leaving behind the elements which I think created the big impact among cinephiles. And it is those shocking, idiosyncratic elements that we saw in Oldboy and The Handmaiden, and you don't see them in Decision to Leave or No Other Choice. And I suspect that's why they're largely forgettable for me. Now, to get back to the people who have been moaning that this film hasn't been included in the Oscar nominations this year, well, first of all, you shouldn't take the Oscars too seriously. It's no longer a reliable source to discover prestigious art. Unfortunately, that reputation died a long time ago. But if you want to be included in that conversation of prestige, you need to leave some kind of mark. And that could be any element of the film, but it has to be strong enough to burn a mark into the viewer's brain. And I'm afraid films that are just technically proficient just don't cut it anymore. And when you think about the films that are remembered throughout time, it's those where we remember the story elements. And I think society is craving great storytelling, or at least I am.